What is up, everybody? Welcome back to yet another Mushoku Mondays. We are now on Volume 6 of the Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation novel series analysis, jumping into the first 2 chapters of the series already, and yes, unfortunately, more skipped content, but I will say there's some nuggets in here. I think there's a lot of world building in these first 2 chapters, and I will say that some people might see that stuff as kind of boring. It's a lot of Rudeus being obsessed with rice, but I really do think these chapters make the area feel like a living, breathing place, unlike the anime that just basically goes from the porch straight to Shirone. So we'll be diving into that stuff. I do want to first welcome my guest. No, it's not Chris, because he would be spoiling everything. No, we got Roxy up here. My 2 beautiful Roxy disc plates that I absolutely adore. I've been looking to get something Roxy related on my wall because I love her so much, and thankfully Web Gaming decided to send me these 2, and I adore them, and special thanks to him. But now, with that said, I have been having a lot of fun with our premieres of these episodes, so if you're missing the premieres, make sure to be checking on the website. I typically post them on Monday morning, my usual time, but I'm now doing premieres rather than just posting the video. So if you want to join in the live chat, we're getting in there and talking to some people, and it's been a lot of fun. It's kind of just another additional fun to add to these weekly releases. It's being able to talk to people and seeing their reaction to my videos as we go along. But no, with all that said, let's jump into Volume 6. This is the last volume of this first season, so I'm excited for what's to come. Opening up Chapter 1, we find that Rudeus has now reached the age of 12. He doesn't know when it happened, he just knows that his adventure card now shows 12 instead of 11, so he figures at some point, boom, he went up a level in years, obviously. But no, it seems like he's a little bit frustrated by this. Like, at some point during his voyage, he's pretty much lost all sense of time, but that pretty much does mean that it's been a whole 2 years since his travels from the Demon Continent through Millis and all the way to the Eastport. But he's not going to let this keep him down. He knows that just ahead of him is the Ch1 Kingdom. He's almost there, and he figures, look, we have money and everything, so we're past all the dangers. From here on, it's a easy trek. I mean, the lands, the highways and everything are so well laid out. There's not much difficult terrain to go through. It's not as dangerous as Demon Continent because the mana is a little bit more subdued. And we all know that's a big lie. This is going to be the easiest part, right? Yeah, we watched the first season. We know this is not going to be the easiest part. But yeah, with all that said, he's really confident. But at the same time, he still has worries. He doesn't know where Zenith is, Lilia, Aisha, or Sylphie. But now, opening up this again, we are in Eastport. Currently, they're at the inn, and they're having another meeting. He lays out this very simple map before them, and he knows the fact that these maps that you can typically buy are very simple. They just have, rough outlines of forests, a couple of locations of villages kind of, pinned on the map, but they're not hyper detailed, and this is for a reason. If these kingdoms restrict people from having high detailed maps, because if an enemy were to get a hold of them, they would know exactly where to attack. They wouldn't be able to plot their armies. He knows at this point that yes, he's done these meetings so often, plotting their course and everything. He figures that Eris would be sick of him by now, but it seems like she's actually listening with a solemn look. But no, obviously the topic at hand is their route, and there's a couple routes that he has here laid out. He first describes the first route, which is taking the highway that's primarily used for trade. He traced this route that detours all the way east around the King Dragon Mountains, and this is supposed to be the safest route, but it takes about 10 months. Obviously, Eris says, well, why don't we go west? That looks like it's quicker. This is, of course, the second route that they have. He says a dense forest that lays out across this entire span west of the King Dragon Mountains. This makes it impossible to travel by carriage, which means that your only real option there is to travel by horseback, which, unfortunately, Eris and Rudeus can't do. So they have to actually do it by foot, which immediately Eris says, okay, scratch the western path. He says, and there's the third route. Now, this is a weird one. He described that this is where they take a ship to go to the Begaritt Continent, and from the Begaritt Continent, they would trek all the way over the land, all the way north to where Ch1 Kingdom is. But he immediately crosses that off the list. And he describes why, and that's because what the Begaritt Continent is. He says the area has even thicker mana than that at the Demon Continent. The average strength of beasts there are on par with the Demon Continent. There's numerous underground labyrinths that create bizarre weather patterns on the surface. He says it's best described as kind of a giant desert. For beasts, you have gigantic scorpions that are about the size of giant tortoises that were on Demon Continent. Additionally, you have masses of enormous worms that prey on the scorpions. The days are scorching hot, the nights are arctic cold. There's almost no oasis, so there's very few places that you can stop and rest. And additionally, as you get closer to the Ch1 Kingdom in the north, the sand gave way to snow with freezing temperatures, which this meant there was fewer monsters to hunt for food. So thus, he says, we're taking the eastern route. And sure enough, Eris says, as usual, you're a coward. He says, look, I'm just faint of heart. She says, I think I could do just fine. He's thinking to himself, obviously, she just wants to go see the Begaritt Continent. She's just full of intrigue of this place. And so his response is, we'd have to take a ship for a long time. Are you sure? And immediately says, we're not going to Begaritt. If you mention ships, Edis is off board. This is where we cut to the meeting with the Mangod. Yes, everything goes white, and suddenly he finds himself in this pure white room. He suddenly had this familiar sensation in himself, and he felt disgusted. Again, this is him revisiting his old self. He's seeing his own body. He says, damn, disgusting. And immediately the Mangod speaks up and says, already resorting to foul language. Crass as ever, I see. At this point, he knows the Mangod standing right before him. But he says, acting like you know me, can't believe you're showing up again. Just when I finally started forgetting about you. Mangod says, yes, it has been a whole year. Rudeus asks, do you only show up once a year? If so, that would put my heart at ease. He says, no, that's not the case at all. Rudeus says, figured as much, obviously because after the first time, he showed up a week later. Mangod gets cheeky, says, that aside, you're as cold as ever. It's all thanks to me that you got the demon eye, you know. At this point, Rudeus expresses, yeah, he's grateful, but he wishes that he told him more. The problem that he's having is that he ended up in a cell, and he missed important information and got into a fight with Paul. Mangod says, yes, that's it is entertaining, isn't it? But are you sure it's my fault? Rudeus is getting a little frustrated. He's reminding himself about his old self. I hate this room. It reminds me of my past self. It's back when I used to blame everything on other people. He's reflected on his mistakes. He's reflected on, he doesn't quite remember. He doesn't remember what he reflected on. He's getting frustrated by the fact that it seems to be pulling him away from something. Mangod says, well, that's part of your charm. But a little reflection won't be enough for you to move forward. Rudy is still stuck in his frustrations like, look, I'll remember once I wake up. He knows that he can recognize his mistakes now. With that, Rudy decides that he wants to restart the conversation, deciding that he will listen to the Mangod. Mangod says, listen? Now this is different. You're honestly going to listen to what I have to say? Rudy is like, yes, but there's one thing I want you to tell me. Mangod's like, what? What's that? I don't mind answering if it's something I have knowledge about. So he says, tell me where my family is. And he responds, I thought your family was in another world. Obviously teasing him. Where he's like, don't play games with me. Zenith, Lilia, and Aisha. If possible, Sylphie, Ghislaine, Philip, and Saros too. Mangod says, I don't know if I should tell you. Rhea says, you're just a voyeur who loves to spy on people's lives. Are you only going to tell me things that's convenient to you? He says, you can arrange for me to meet the world's greatest demon emperor, but you can't tell me where my family is? Mangod says, okay, sorry, I got carried away, but are you sure? I might lie this time. And Rhea says, wait, lie? What lie? So you're finally going to admit it. That's right. You're the type to lie, aren't you? Still, Rudeus can't trust this guy. But this is an emergency. He'll do anything he says, but if he lies, he'll never trust him again, like he ever trusted him before. Mangod says, okay, then there's something I want you to promise me. If my advice allows you to reunite with your family, then I want you to trust me from now on, okay? Rudeus says, are you telling me that you want me to be your little puppet or something? Like obey your every command? He says, no, not asking that much. But it's going to be exhausting if every time you come here, you're hostile. Rudeus says, yeah, it'll be exhausting even if I'm not. Do you even know what it's like to be haunted by your past you want to forget? To feel like the memories of your repentance and growth have been erased? To be overwhelmed by self-loathe the moment you wake up in the morning? It's kind of one of those moments that I kind of wish that they covered in the anime. Like at this moment, he's just so deep in how much he hates being in this room. And again, we've kind of hit this on several of the other chapters where we have the encounters with the Mangod. Again, he's kind of shown himself. It's his inner body that's inside of his mind. His old self that he can't seem to let go. And it was something that way back then, me and Chris were both kind of curious at the time, is that there's going to be a point in which he forgets about that body. Like at some point he meets the Mangod and he's Rudeus, like his new self. Because every time he's in here now, it's this moment of kind of remembering his past and just hating himself. And like you said at the beginning of this whole encounter, I almost forgot about this. Additionally, Mangod, I almost forgot about this old self and I feel disgusted. But no, the Mangod says, I see, I've wronged you. How about we set some rules? Like, I'll tell you ahead of time when I'm going to drop in and give advice. Where he says, that sounds wonderful. How about you never come to see me for 100 years? Mangod says, but you'll be dead, won't you? Where he says, I'm telling you I never want to see your face again. So he says, so you don't want advice from me then? Where he says, no, wait, I'm sorry. I'll compromise. If you give me advice this time that will reunite me with my family members, I'll stop being hostile when we talk. Mangod says, and you'll trust me? He says, nope, I'm not going to go that far. But I'll at least stop these meaningless exchanges about listening or not. Rudeus says, you compromise too. Give me prior warning before you show up, or go into someone else's dreams and use them to pass a message to me. Now, this is an interesting thing, because again, this is one that I don't believe is in the anime. I went back and checked and I didn't see it, so maybe I might have skipped it. Mangod says, that would be difficult. There's actually a condition that must be met for me to be able to appear in someone's dreams. Rudeus says, a condition? Meaning you can't just show up whenever? Mangod says, exactly. Additionally, I can only show up in the dreams of someone who is in the same wavelength as I am. There's not many people who can receive my advice in such fortuitous timing. You're lucky. Rudeus is like, I weep for joy. What's the condition? Mangod says, who knows? I'm not even sure myself. All I know is that there will be a sudden aha moment. This guy is the one. Today is the time. And that's when I'm able to link up. So Rudeus at this point decides that he wants to have more details in the advice instead. He feels like he's been played at this point, which the Mangod agrees with. Rudeus says, go on with the advice then. At this point, a vision appears in Rudeus's demon eye. He's in some back alley in some country. A lone girl stands there, and a soldier violently grabs her hand. Another soldier is tearing up a piece of paper that he grabbed from her. The girl screams something, and then the vision ends there. Mangod says, she is Aisha Greyrat. She's being detained in Shirone Kingdom. You'll be there during those events. You'll meet and save her. But you absolutely must not tell her your name. Call yourself Killmaster of Dead End and ask her details on her situation. Then send a letter to your acquaintance in Shirone Royal Palace. If you do both, Lilia and Aisha will be rescued from that place. Rudeus says, wait, what? Acquaintance? Letter? Mangod says, was that too much details? If I tell you too much, it'll spoil my fun. Wonder who you'll get along with. Rudeus says, wait, they're in Ch1 Kingdom? They should have been found already. And wait, get along? Does that mean that I'm going to clash with the other? The Mangod says, good luck, Rudeus. Luck. And that's the end of the Mangod's conversation. Like I said, was kind of intriguing that it really does feel like at this point, yes, you're getting a lot more emphasis in this volume, in the novel, than the anime about how much he hates the position that he's in there, and how much he really distrusts the Mangod. And now it's kind of portrayed in the anime and the idea of how, obviously, combative he is when he talks to him, but this definitely does go into a little further extent. But additionally, like you've noticed, the one thing the anime did not cover was getting into details about how Rudeus is different. Rudeus is this one thing that he's able to communicate to. So yes, we kind of had our early speculations that because Rudeus was traveled from another world, that's the reason why the Mangod's able to communicate with him. But it kind of goes a little bit further in the idea that Mangod doesn't really know what is making this connection. He doesn't know why he's able to communicate to Rudeus. It's just that he's on the same wavelength. Like, you have these two waves and everybody else is kind of a different wave, but his kind of syncs up with Rudeus, so he's able to communicate to him, which is definitely an interesting thing to note. It's putting a little bit more thought into why the Mangod is communicating specifically to Rudeus. Now, it could be a lie. It could be an absolute lie. There's nothing to say that the Mangod can be trusted in what he says, but it is interesting. But additionally, kind of bargaining all this extra information from him is kind of interesting, though. At this point, Rudeus wakes up and he immediately feels nauseous and he runs to the bathroom and pukes. Yes, in the anime, he's still on the boat going to Eastport and he's puking off the side of the boat. No, he's in an inn and he goes to puke in the bathroom. His head was just pounding. Ruijerd walks up with a look of worry on his face and says, are you okay? Rudeus says, I'm fine. He says, what did you eat? Did you use detoxification magic? At this point, Ruijerd pulls this cloth out of his pocket and wipes his mouth with it. Rudeus kind of passes it off that he failed to moderate his magic using his Eye of Foresight and it made him sick, which is definitely something that has occurred before. Technically, it could be the truth because when he did speak to the Mangod, he used his Eye of Foresight to see that vision. So it could be that caused him to get sick. He starts thinking to himself like, yeah, this eye technically led to him beating Gallus. But he kind of feels like he could have done that on his own. He believes that the Mangod perhaps got him this eye for this purpose, to be able to show him visions to help guide him better, not to defeat Gallus. It sure did feel like the Mangod was making these careful preparations for something. At this point, anxiety reared its ugly head again. For the first time, Rudeus feared the Mangod. He got the impression this creature with undefined form, with an incredible power, was trying to use him for something. It sent a chill down his spine. Ruijerd noticed Rudeus go pale, asking him if he was sure he was okay. Rudeus almost blurted out his anxiety, mentioning that the Mangod has been monitoring him ever since he first met Ruijerd, following his advice and doing what he's told. However, he realized at some point that the first time he met the Mangod advised him to help Ruijerd. Why not before then? Why not before the disaster? Why after the displacement? Why help Ruijerd and not just rely on him? It felt almost as if things were connecting. This is where it gets kind of interesting. While he had no proof maybe the Mangod plans to make Ruijerd do something. The Mangod said he could only appear in Rudeus's dreams if certain conditions are met. Perhaps he couldn't manipulate Ruijerd directly, so he triggered the displacement to transport Rudeus over to the Demon Continent, someone who could fit that criteria, and then have Rudeus get Ruijerd to accompany him all the way to the central continent. Of course, he thinks at that point, in that case, why help me get the demon eye or give me advice to save Aisha? He didn't know what the Mangod was thinking, or if he should say something to Ruijerd. But at this point, Rudeus just really desired somebody to confide in. But he didn't want to put something else on Ruijerd's shoulders. But who knows, maybe telling Ruijerd this would just fulfill the Mangod's unknown conditions. Honestly, Ruijerd would easily take whatever the Mangod said to him. At the same time, Rudeus wasn't convinced the Mangod was telling him the truth. His hostility for the Mangod was making it difficult for the Mangod to deceive him. So he felt that if he kept that up, then nothing terrible will happen. So Rudeus at this point says, Mr. Ruijerd, if you ever find yourself in a difficult situation and someone whispers honey words into your ear, don't believe what they say. Deceitful people strategically target you when you're at your most vulnerable. Ruijerd replies, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I understand. That's like a people die when they're killed kind of statement. I don't have no idea what you're talking about. Understood. Rudeus had mixed feelings as Ruijerd nodded at him earnestly. Ruijerd trusted him, but he was hiding things from Ruijerd, mainly because he convinced himself that it's best to keep it a secret. That didn't alleviate the guilt. At this point, the headache and the nausea started fading without his notice. His thoughts now weighed heavily for a different reason. He returned to his room, crawled into bed, but he didn't sleep. Ideas just kind of churned through his head. Eris was sleeping in the bed next to him, snoring, positioned unladylike, in her shorts, legs spread out. Her shirt was lifted up and her belly button was showing all adorably. She was drooling and dribbling down her chin as she grinned in her sleep. He smiled wryly at her sleep talking, rose out of bed, pulled her shirt back down, and adjusted her blanket. At that time, Eris says, Rudeus is a pervert. She had a dirty look on her face. Here he was sick and worried, and she still called him a perv. He attempted to touch her chest so actions would at least warrant an accusation, but drowsiness hit him and he collapsed on the bed. And that's chapter 1. Now, here's my conundrum, because like I said, most all of this is skipped. Yes, there's like half of the conversation with the Mangod is in the anime, but like I said, a lot of the stuff about, certain people of wavelengths he's able to communicate to and all this kind of stuff, that wasn't really covered. But additionally, what's really fascinating here is that the after conversation after talking to the Mangod was pretty much absent in the anime. Again, it cuts to him puking off the side of the boat, and he talks to Ruijerd very briefly, but it's nothing about this kind of stuff. What's really fascinating here, and again, this is one of those things where they skipped in the anime, obviously, and it does make you wonder as to the validity of the statements themselves, but I still am fine with that. If the reason they skipped this conversation about Ruijerd possibly being the goal of the Mangod, it makes me believe that yes, that's not going to come to fruition, but still it's fascinating because this is technically Rudeus sort of believing that he's not important. Oh, so what is the possibility that it's not me the Mangod's using, but he's using Ruijerd? What if the whole reason to all this stuff, maybe he caused the displacement, maybe he then had me get Ruijerd and travel all over the west? How other reason why he'd be able to get Ruijerd over there? Could he create a displacement over there? Technically, they had enough mana or whatever, something over here to do that. Maybe he couldn't do that over there to get Ruijerd over to here. So he needed somebody to drag Ruijerd all the way to the west. Is there a purpose for Ruijerd? Does the Mangod want Ruijerd over here? That's the question mark. And again, I think it's really fascinating. Again, it might not come true. This could all just be Rudeus just rambling things and it never comes true. But at least creates that question mark. And I love that kind of stuff. Moving on into chapter 2. So we're getting into some travel, some world building, and yes, lots and lots of rice, because Rudeus is obsessed with rice. But no, they grabbed breakfast at a pub, and that's where Rudeus announced, we're going to stop by Shirone Kingdom. Immediately, Ruijerd and Eris both nodded in agreement. It's kind of surprising. They didn't even ask why, which technically was appreciated. This allowed Rudeus to not have to sit here and explain and dance around the fact that the Mangod basically told him to go there. But no, Eris says, Shirone, you mean the place your master is at, right? Hearing her say that, an image of a girl came to mind, Roxy Migurdia. He thinks to himself, yeah, that's right. She was supposed to be there. The Mangod must have meant to send a letter to her. I don't know how he could have forgot that she's at Shirone. How dare you, Rudeus? You don't deserve to have her on your wall, Rudeus. Rudeus says, yes, that's right. Someone I really respect. My teacher. It's funny because Rudeus at this point is hesitating to say master, because technically Roxy forbade him to call her that, even though he's technically been calling her master all throughout the Demon Continent when he was praising her name as they traveled. Eris said we should stop by and meet them. They might be able to help us somehow. Eris nodded to herself in satisfaction. Rudeus thought to himself, yes, somebody as incredible as Roxy is surely to be able to help us. However, she is a magician of the royal palace and probably really busy. He didn't want to trouble her. She had already done so much for him. Regardless of everything, he wanted to see her. He also wanted to thank her for the Dictionary of Demonkind. If it weren't for that book, he'd still be stuck somewhere in the Demon Continent. He feels very regretted that he lost it in the incident, and it deserved to be copied and sold to the worldwide. It's so funny because as I read this part, I'm thinking to myself, there's two really great things in this segment. One is the aspect that, yes, while Roxy believed that she proved no benefit to Rudeus, she believed that he would have been just fine if he'd never met her. He would be a genius either way. That she basically contributed nothing to him and his genius. And obviously from our perspective, we know that's not true. We know that the whole reason that Rudeus ever left his house was because of Roxy. He was deathly afraid of leaving. And again, that was that whole thing in the first volume, and the idea that the moment that she pulled him out of that meant so much to him. Like, that was a huge, massive step for him in his life. Again, in his previous life, he was stuck and shut in for tens of years. I mean, he was a NEET, and he was afraid of leaving. He was afraid of who was outside, who was mocking him. And thus, that was something that was so impactful to him. And even when she went to go depart after he graduated, he didn't want her to leave. She was special to him. And yes, technically, he kept her pantsu. So it's kind of funny from this perspective, you see how much he's like, I just want to see her. She means so much to me. She did so much for me. And it's so contrast to just the third from the last chapter of the last volume. Additionally, yes, this is the point which it almost feels like it's finally acknowledging the idea that he lost that book. That book was so great. Again, for those that never read the novels and maybe you missed my volume that we talked about that segment, that book was incredible. Like, there was so much more in that book than the anime covered. It had so much details of the world and the language and everything, and it was basically a dictionary for the world of the Demon Continent. But anyways, moving on. Eris says, I want to see your teacher. And Ruijerd said, I'm interested in meeting them too. Kind of found it interesting. I noted at this point that they're not gendering her. So it's kind of odd. You would think that they would get a hint as to her gender, but I guess technically if he's always saying, my master all the time, and never saying she did this, just saying master did this or taught me this, I guess they wouldn't technically know gender. And I'm wondering if they're purposely not gendering her at this point because later on they're going to realize it's a female and Eris is going to get jealous and Ruijerd's going to be like, oh, okay. But anyways, they seemed intrigued. Probably because he keeps invoking her name with praise. Rudeus was proud to call her his teacher and mentioning her everywhere he went. Rudeus says, all right, when we get to Shirone Kingdom, I'll introduce you. Sadly, they never do. With that, they set off. Leaving Eastport, they travel along the highway, which took them straight to Wyvern, the capital of the King Dragon Realm. From here, the route veered around the King Dragon Mountains and split off. One path went north and went west. This is where we get a stay at Wyvern. Apparently, they had to spend 7 days there. They planned to only stay 3 days, but they had carriage issues, and the repairs took some time. Sadly, yes, his magic can fix stone and steel, but there wasn't really anything magic relay that he could use for wood. He, of course, paid to have a rush repair, but it still took a lot of time. At this point, he's really kind of worrying because of this delay, is he going to end up missing the incident with Aisha? But again, the man god said that he'd be there for it. So it must be fate. Maybe this whole incident, maybe this is fate. Maybe he has to stop here. So he tried to stay calm. At this point, they kind of tour around Wyvern. The King Dragon Realm was the third biggest country in the world, largest in the southern part of the central continent. It had 4 vassal states under it. At one point, it was one of many countries in the south, but that all changed when they attacked the King Dragon Mountains in the northwest and slew the ruler Kajakt, the monarch of the King Dragons. This gave them access to huge veins of materials, and that boosted their resources and power. It also was the origins of the 48 magical swords that were now scattered around the world, as well as one of the places mentioned in the line of the Epic of the North God. Be curious to see if at some point they get into the 48 magic swords at some point, or if we've seen one and I just don't know. Maybe Eris' sword is one. Probably not. He knows at this point that despite these stories, it didn't take much emphasis on tradition. It felt like America. It was like a mixture of different elements. There was many smithies, sword training halls. There was so many different styles that were diverse. But most of the techniques that were being seen in these places were North God style and Water God style. They even snuck peek inside of some of these halls, and they were mostly training children's, and most of the masters weren't even advanced tier sword fighters. Eris said with a snort, they're nothing special. Even Ruijerd expressed disapproval. As they're traveling around, he decides that he's going to go ahead ahead and see if he can gather some information on missing persons, those that were displaced. He ended up finding one of Paul's underlings at the Adventure Guild, but they immediately said that they really have no info in this country. It wasn't going to be really easy to find any missing persons at this point. With that said, he decides to do some usual market research. He knows that there was specialty goods from both Millis and Central Continent sold here. Then he made the discovery: rice. You knew it was coming. You knew it was coming. It was a bit yellow in color, but it was definitely rice. Obviously, he knew that there was rice in the area because he just had some in Eastport. He knows that unfortunately, despite wanting to eat food in this country, most of it was just easily made soups and porridge. He wanted pure white rice. The moment he seen rice on sale, he felt an electric shock run through him. If he couldn't buy cooked white rice, he just needed to make it. He bought it instantly. This is where we get into cooking time with Rudeus. A few hours later, he was in the inn's garden preparing his food. He had 4.5 grams of rice, cooking utensils made from earth magic, an outdoor stove, a recipe the pub owner taught him, eggs, and salt. He began starting his fire, washing the rice at the same time while reading the recipe. Edis ends up showing up and says, "What are you doing?" Rudeus said with his game face on, "An experiment." Edis was giving off this act that she was disinterested, but obviously as she was exercising her arms and swinging them around, she was shooting him gazes. At this point, using the hourglass that the pub owner let him borrow, he started to slowly increase the heat while turning it over. After the time was up, he extinguished the fire. Edis ended up walking over, stooping down beside him as he finished it, and he opens up the lid, and the smell just hit their noses. Edis says, "Smells good. Good job, Rudeus." But Rudeus said, "No, need to taste it first." He pinched some rice between his fingers, popped it in his mouth, and said, "I give it a 45 out of 100. It didn't come anywhere near the two types of rice in his memory, koshihikari and sasa nishiki. It wouldn't even be a C rank. It was dry, had bitterness, and is still faintly yellow. His cooking methods was partly to blame, but also the rice didn't seem to be a staple in this country. He couldn't call this white rice. To be fair, he probably should have given it a 30, a failing grade, but nostalgia was hitting him. With seasoning, it could be a 50. He says, I'm nearly too kind, he thought to himself. You weren't very kind to the death god, come on. I got a kick out of the fact that at this point I was reading this, I was thinking about I wonder if he's gonna mention the death god, and sure enough he mentions something later on, but it was kind of funny that I was already thinking about it. Edis says, "We ate this before, right? What kind of experiment is this?" Where he says, "This is just the beginning." At this point, he takes a bowl and he places some rice in it. And then he grabs this egg that he uses detoxification magic on and cracked it into the bowl. And then sprinkled a little bit of salt on top of it, put both hands together before going to dig in. Edis says, "Huh? But Rudeus, the egg is raw." He took a huge big bite, and it smelled questionable. The salt didn't even seem to do anything. He realized the egg's flavor was different. It was a far cry from the fresh ones in Japan that were for raw consumption. He probably should cast detoxification on himself afterwards to be safe. He realized at this point he definitely needed soy sauce to cut the apparent raw taste. He wondered if there was any soy sauce in the world, or a substitution. Because Edis inquired, he decided to make a bowl for her as well. She asked if it was as simple as that before she starts to dig in. Edis chewed slowly, with mixed emotions on her face. He then broke an egg into her bowl, and she replied, "This is better than before," before filling her cheeks. The raw egg mixed with rice is really the best meal ever. A perfect balance. They end up finishing up the rest of the rice, even the burnt rice at the bottom. Riijerd was the only one that didn't get to share. But he made no complaints. Riijerd really was the adult, but Rudeus felt really guilty. So he decided that next time he'll make sure that he got a share. Which makes you wonder if they ever do before the end of the first season. But no, I hate this because the idea of raw egg... I don't know, maybe the rice does something to it. Maybe it absorbs that nasty raw egg flavor, but what is it gonna do? Oof. It's either salt, some sort of curry or something, or sugar. That's about the only thing I could do with rice. At this point, we cut to them departing the King Dragon realm. As they travel on this highway going north, there was 2 more countries between them and the Shirone Kingdom. This is Sanakia Kingdom and Kikka Kingdom. Both were vassal states of the King Dragon realm. Specifically, as they traveled through Sanakia Kingdom, there was rice cultivation booming there. The climate must have been perfect for it as the highway was lined with rice paddies. There was a lot of rivers in the area. The topography was similar to Japan and East Asia. He also noticed the rice the same that he found in King Dragon realm, meaning that it's probably exported from there. He gave that rice the name the Sanakia rice. At some point, they arrive at an inn where mostly the food is seafood and rice. Up until this point, he kind of ate in moderation. But unfortunately, the appeal of rice was too much. Edis kept observing Rudeus during meals, probably having piqued her interest as he's typically fussy about food. Rudeus says, "What's wrong?" Edis says, "I thought you were the type that didn't really eat much." Rudeus at this point acknowledges the fact that yes, technically in my previous life, I wasn't a light eater. I always went back to the table for helpings if there was anything there. Honestly, the only reason in this world that he was practicing moderation is because the food didn't really suit his palate. In the Demon Continent, most of the food was just tough meat. In the Asura Kingdom, meals mostly was bread heavy and felt lacking. Zenith's cooking wasn't bad, but he couldn't help long for rice. Cutting to the Adventure Guild, he notes, look, I'm doing more than just eating. No one even seemed to care at this place that they invoked the name Dead End. It makes sense. Someone popular in America wouldn't necessarily be popular or known in Japan. Adventurers probably heard the name Dead End at some point, but no one really kicked up a fuss. Even knowing what a Superb were, without the signature green hair, no one recognized Ruijerd. He knows at this point that despite that, A-rank adventurers were a little bit different. They end up getting confronted by an adventurer who says, hey, you guys... never seen you before. You're A-rank, right? Did you just form a group? Rudeus notes this man has an aura about him that's kind of similar to Nokopara. Considering how that went, he doesn't want to have anything to do with this guy. He's not keen on getting friendly with him. Rudeus says, yeah, we just started 2 years ago. The guy says, oh, that's not something you hear around here. Dead End, huh? That's the name of some fiend from the Demon Continent, right? Rudeus says, yes, we've traveled all the way from the Demon Continent. The guy laughs and says, saw that one coming. And let me guess, that guy over there is the fiend. Rudeus says, yes, but could you please refrain from calling him that? The guy says, why? That's what you guys are trying to pass yourself off as, right? He began to laugh like they were pulling his leg. But Rudeus kept a serious expression. Additionally, Eris looked perturbed, and Ruijerd looked uncomfortable. Suddenly, the man broke into a cold sweat, seeing their reaction. Wait, are you for real? Rudeus said, if you don't believe me, would you like him to show you the gem on his forehead? The guy's like, no, that's fine. I didn't think that he was a real thing. Guess Superbs really do exist. Rudeus thinks to himself, the fact that they achieved A rank on the Demon Continent lent more credibility to the claims that Ruijerd was a Superb. Despite the harsh treatment demons faced on the Central Continent, people didn't really seem terrified by Superbs. Probably because that threat is so foreign. I mean, it's similar to brown bears, when most people believe that brown bears are harmless, but those that actually live in the mountains that encounter them know they're dangerous. Rudeus knows that the name of Dead End had almost lost all its value. But with that said, it would be much easier to restore Ruijerd's reputation when people weren't terrified of him. Still, he hadn't come up with a plan yet. Obviously, the figure that he made previously wasn't going to really work when they're still in areas that practice the Millist faith. At this point, he notes that Eris is just glaring at this guy, and he says, please don't start a fight. Eris says, I know that already. Rudeus knows at this point that Eris has stopped scrapping with adventurers. Her demeanor had grown tougher. She no longer had the face of a novice. One glance of her, people could tell that she was dangerous. So it begs the question, why would people even bother approaching? But still, Eris had grown to understand adventurer's style of humor. If someone said something to her, she would realize that she'd heard it before. She'd answer their quip with some appropriate response. The person would laugh and she would grin back at them. She'd honestly had become like any other adventurer. She still got in fights, but it was mostly C-rank youngsters. They'd pick a fight claiming that she was just being carried by Rudeus and Ruijerd. Typically, that would result in her one punch knocking them out. And honestly, morons like that were kind of common in most every single one of the guilds they went to. Rudeus himself typically would just reply with, that's right, the master of our party is incredible. We're living the high life with no pride. Which technically was true. Their party relied on Ruijerd for a lot of advice. Eris really didn't like this kind of attitude of Rudeus's, but there was really no way they could have done this without him. And with this, they leave. And I really like this segment because it really kind of puts a lot of emphasis on the growth of Eris. Eris has grown a lot. I mean, before she was all about dreaming the day that she'd go on an adventure, just like Ghislaine did, become an adventurer, kill goblins, all this kind of stuff. And it really feels like now, at least amongst other adventurers, it feels like she's kind of fitting in. She knows their humor. She knows how they act. She's no longer the one that comes into an adventure guild. Somebody looks at her and she immediately breaks out in a fight. She's really grown up. We cut at this point them arriving in Kikka Kingdom. He notes that flowers that resembled mustard were spread wide in Kikka Kingdom. From the highway, they can see the endless fields of white flowers. It was definitely a flourishing industry. He knows that rice was a staple in this country's cuisine too. Upon testing it, he realized that the further north, the better the quality of rice. He felt that one day, he would experience his love at first bite in this world. However, the northern part of the Central Continent was split into a bunch of tiny countries. And these countries were all engaging in continuous minor conflicts. Obviously, the conflict zone, which we kind of mentioned in Ghislaine's extra chapter at the end of, I believe, the second volume. He says there's no way to cultivate delicious rice under those circumstances. And this is where we have a little segment known as the Nanahoshiyaki. Nanahoshi, what in the world are you doing? Anyway, he says there's a dish called Nanahoshiyaki that was popular all the way from the King Dragon realm to the Kikka Kingdom. The meat was covered in rice flour and wheat flour, fried in oil in high temperature. In other words, karage. Apparently it was developed in the Ashura Kingdom and gained huge popularity before making its way there. However, this karage, or fried chicken, didn't taste too good. The meat they used was typically sheep, pig, or horse. And there was no set temperature for frying it either. So sometimes it would become dry or it was just gooey. It also wasn't properly seasoned. Even though they could use salt, dried herbs, or sauce that's unique in each area, the food that they had at the Eastport suddenly didn't seem bad compared. There he says it. The poor death god was doing a good job of it and he just basically ended his career. So there you go. Or maybe it was the fact that he was using dragon meat. Who knows? But no, he said that it's opposite, in fact. Like, it was really good. Honestly, Rudeus was a bit of a gourmand. He understood that cooks in this country were trying their best, but still, it wasn't what he longed for. The lack of soy sauce was impossible to overlook. Honestly, with garlic, ginger, and soy sauce, he could end up making something salty and sweet. At this moment, it knows that Ruijerd and Eris were looking at his troubled face. Ruijerd kind of honestly thinks that Rudeus is just being picky and that he's got his own opinions on the flavor. But Eris, on the other hand, thinks it's really good. With that, Ruijerd and Eris are just gulping the food down. Rudeus honestly didn't come all the way here to become a food critic, but he couldn't help but desire the taste of soy sauce. At this point, Ruijerd and Eris asked for seconds and gulp it down, and enjoyed the crunchy and juicy bits. It made Rudeus really believe the two of them were really fortunate, that they didn't know what they were really missing with true karage. He knew that there was something better out there. He couldn't be content. His quest for rice and fried chicken with soy sauce, tofu, and miso soup with seaweed continued. Of course, alongside his quest to find missing people, but this was how it went for 4 months until they reached Shirone Kingdom. And I'm going to stop it there with the end of chapter 2. Obviously, the coming chapters 3 and I think 4, maybe 5 are all going to be in the Shirone Kingdom, so it'll probably better be covering those all in one segment. So we'll see, hopefully, if I can cover everything in Shirone Kingdom into one video, but we'll see how it turns out. But like I said before, I do really enjoy these first few chapters, mainly because it puts a lot more perspective on Ruijerd himself. It obviously puts a lot of perspective into the Mangod. Again, like I said earlier, this whole aspect of Rudeus believing that maybe possibly the Mangod wants to use Ruijerd, not necessarily Rudeus, which we'll see how it goes along as we get past what we already know from the first season. But like I said, still some really good stuff here. I can't express enough for me personally whenever it comes to things that seem like they're more mundane, like technically which each of these countries, what they're cultivating, how they're tied in with the King Dragon realm, all that kind of stuff. That stuff makes the world itself feel more alive. Again, it's not necessarily anything about, growing Rudeus as a character besides his obsession with rice, but necessarily it puts an emphasis on the idea that these are all nations that have civilizations, what they focus on, what they trade, what their specialties are, what sort of atmosphere they have, their environment that could cultivate certain sorts of crops. These are the kind of things that make me believe that it's more than just a montage of scenes of Rudeus riding a carriage through it or riding a boat through it. It makes me believe that what they're passing through is a kingdom with people and specialties, which in the grand scheme of things will probably make the impact of certain events that could possibly happen more impactful. What if the King Dragon realm gets involved with the Shirone Kingdom or the Ashura Kingdom? I'll then remember, oh, the King Dragon realm, that's the place that became one big nation and got all these resources from the mountainside after killing the king. And oh yeah, by the way, their specialty is rice. And if they get destroyed, Rudeus is going to be super mad because they have rice there. That kind of stuff. And again, it's kind of cool to see, them avoiding the conflict zone, which we obviously have already kind of gotten a sense of based on what happened with Geeslane. Is it still technically a conflict zone? Because it felt like things sort of got resolved up there to an extent. There could still be other nations that are conflicting as well. And again, the other aspect of these chapters I really liked is, again, getting more of a sense of Eris's growth. There's these little moments that I think really make character interactions, things that really make those later moments more impactful. I believe there's a side of me that kind of believes that when we had that moment with Turning Point 2, Eris's breakdown of Rudeus being in danger may have been more impactful in the anime if I'd seen these little scenes of her, yes, being more mature in the Adventure Guild and noting how she's grown as a person and an adventurer. And additionally, these little moments where she's eating rice alone with Rudeus. These are cute little moments between the two of them that really kind of accent the characters. And yeah, technically her talking in her sleep and him, covering her up rather than taking advantage of her. It emphasizes his self-control, but at the same time shows this element of him taking care of her, not allowing her to sleep with her belly showing and getting a cold. At any rate, that is Volume 6, Chapter 1 and 2. Like I said before, look forward to jumping into 3 and onward next week, and hope you guys will join me for that. As usual, doing these premieres, a lot of fun, and I hope you guys enjoy this video as always. As always, I do appreciate your guys' support greatly. Those of you that share, comment, hit the like button, all that stuff helps me out. I greatly appreciate it. Additionally, if you are looking for other ways to support us, we do have a Patreon link, a tips link, and a super thanks button down below. You can also become a member of the channel itself, and you get little perks like emotes and stuff. But no matter how you support me, I greatly appreciate you people. You guys are so amazing. Additionally, if you're new to the channel, make sure that subscribe button so you get all my content. I do news, reviews, first impressions, top lists. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Also, you can get my weekly videos on the Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation novel series as we go through it. I greatly appreciate you guys' support, and y'all take care.